So I appreciate that you took the time to come to our panel session, and I'm privileged to welcome our distinguished panelists. Real briefly, I'm Sam Ramsey. I'm the Director of Open Source and Linux Strategy at Microsoft. We're going to be talking about challenges and opportunities in mashing up the web. So much of what we do today is made up of open source technology. So many of the challenges come down to interoperability. We've really got a star-studded panel for you. So I'm going to start with, I'm going to briefly introduce the panelists, then they're going to introduce themselves. And then we'll get down to the core panel conversation. You should have plenty of time at the end to ask questions. You're going to have to come up and address the mic. We are broadcasting this live on the web. It'll be continually rebroadcast via different blogs and links. It'll also be broadcast at different mix events that go on around the world. So several thousand people will ultimately be enlightened by the panelists' response to your thoughtful questions. So thanks in advance for having the best questions possible. So I have Andy Goodmans, co-inventor of PHP, CTO and co-founder of Zen Technologies, they're the PHP company. I've got Sean Burke, director in the .NET team. He's claim to fame in open source is at Microsoft. He led the initiative to create the first open source deliveries on the .NET platform. The Ajax Control Toolkit, #1 download on Codeplex, Microsoft's open source forge, and also led the release of the reference for the .NET framework. We've got Mike Schrepfer, Vice President of Engineering at Mozilla Corporation. He's responsible for all of the worldwide development on both Firefox and Thunderbird. And finally, Aaron Fulkerson. Aaron is the CEO and co-founder of DekiWiki, one of the top wikis in the world, 2,000 downloads a day. It's a fundamentally core mashup platform. So when you think about the panelists we've got the whole stack from the server to Ajax middleware to the browser to an application that just fundamentally is a mashup. If these technologies work, it's all good. Any challenges represent challenges they've got to solve. So thanks for your attention. So why don't we take 3 minutes and Andy, just give everybody a sense of your background and then maybe your take on where mashups are today.
So I'm Andy Goodman, CTO of Zen, and we're the PHP company, and I'm obviously more a server person. So it's a bit less flashy than Silverlight and Ajax and so on. But when you think about it, most people when they start talking about mashups, they're basically talking about a cloud, right? There's a cloud out there. Ray Ozzie mentioned it this morning. There's a lot of information in there. There are transactions that are hiding behind that cloud. The truth is that today PHP is really the majority of the cloud. If you go and look at web service vendors, web service providers, most of those web services are coming from PHP. On the back end, not only do they expose web services through REST or through SOAP, they also have to then interoperate with databases, transactions, SAP systems, other web services, data formats. And so what I foremost do is I take a kind of a server-centric view of mashups and of rich internet applications, and I see what's the data and what are the transactions that you have to be able to run into the back end. And so I think part of what we're going to talk about today is I'm going to give kind of the point of view of the server side. And then, of course, as at the end of the day, we do have customers, and our customers don't really care, what the different pieces are in building a web application. They just want to know how to build them. I, of course, spend a lot of time looking at Ajax technologies, looking at Flex, looking at Silverlight, and seeing how when we go to a customer and he wants to use one of those technologies, that we make sure that those technologies really interoperate well with PHP. So I'll talk a bit today about the server side to mashups and how we expose those services to you so you can actually create a mashup, what some of those challenges are, and then I think also a lot of the interoperability pieces. And of course, one of the things that I want to see, looking from the server side, I want to see the front ends interoperate better. So I want you to be able to take a gadget that's built in Silverlight, a gadget that's built in Ajax, and you should be able to mesh those up together, and they should be able to communicate both on the client side and on the server side.
Awesome. Thanks, Andy. Good. Sean?
What were the questions again?
So a little bit of your background, sort of how you're coming into the world of mashups,
right,
and where you think it's at today.
Okay. So my name is Sean Burke. I'm a director in the .NET development platform at Microsoft. I run a small team that we call the Agility team. And what we do is we focus on high-value, out-of-band releases. Some of the things that we've done that you might be familiar with, Sam mentioned the Ajax Control Toolkit, which has been a really successful project that we built out, an open source project hosted on Codeplex, built on top of the ASP.NET Ajax libraries. My team also did, if you were at Mix last year, when we first announced Silverlight, there was an app called Silverlight Airlines. A lot of people saw. My team did that work as well. And more recently, we've been focusing on building out the Silverlight controls that Scott demoed today during the keynote. So we do kind of small projects, shorter time frames, but really focus on transparency. In all three of those efforts, we've shipped source, buildable source to customers as well. So as far as mashups are concerned, I think that the way we organize the panel here is kind of up the stack. And so as Andy mentioned, he takes a server-centric point of view. In my role, I take kind of a tools and a framework-centric point of view. How do we allow developers really kind of consistent and easy way to access the services that are out in the cloud and to tie them together into applications that they can roll out in their organization. Be able to access those services, whether or not they're running on a PHP web service backend or an ASP.NET web service backend or some other platform. And how do we tie those things together? How do we think about things like discovery and compatibility and consistency across the APIs? And give people tools to really write these applications with a lot less code and a lot less trial and error.
Thanks, Sean. Mike?
Hey, I'm from Mozilla. Since you guys are going to get to ask us questions, I thought I'd start with one quick question. Show of hands, how many of you here use Firefox? Wow. All right, I'll stay on the panel. All right. All right. Those of you who use Firefox already may know a little bit about how it's built, but Firefox is an open source project. It's thousands of people from all over the world who come together to build this in an open and transparent way. It's a very old open source project. It's been around about 10 years. And I won't go too much into details about it, but just give you some amazing things about it. One example to me that's apropos of how Firefox is built is it ships in 50 languages across the world. That's more than most software does, most commercial software from many vendors. And it ships in languages like Gaelic and Estonian. These aren't high value for dollar languages. And that's because each one of these languages is done by a volunteer translation team. So there are no paid translators anywhere on the Mozilla staff. And so it's just a microcosm of the way in which kind of Mozilla projects like Firefox, Thunderbird, and others are built. And I think the thing I'm interested in on this panel is talking a little bit more about the web and understanding that people are amazingly creative. I think I'm always astounded at what developers will do on the web, given just a few tiny tools and how they will bend and twist them into build something that the people who originally built those tools had no idea you wanted to do. Right? So I feel like a lot of our job is to catch up with the creativity of people using what's out there already to build really amazing mashups, big applications, and things like that. So I think the thing that's most interesting for me is learning where we can build parts into the platform on the server and on the client that make it easier, faster, more secure for you to build mashup applications. And we're working on some of those now, but I hope we get lots of time to talk about that in the question section.
Thanks, Mike. Aaron?
So MindTouch is a free and open source developer of DekiWiki. So we developed DekiWiki. It's free open source. You can go download it. We're announcing a shared hosted site at this event with some new support for some of the announcements that came out of Microsoft, like ADO.NET and Silverlight and some other things. So wikis are interesting. They're proliferating everywhere. What we've done is considerably different from your typical point application wiki. And that's why we're so popular, I think, is because we're offering a lot more value than just a text-based collaboration with a wiki. And what we do is our DekiWiki provides connective tissue for the enterprise. You can hook up your databases, your other applications that are exposed over web services, and then an IT administrator can hook them into the framework and expose them to their end users for them to create data mashups and composite applications. The significance of this is that it gives them some new tools to visualize information in ways that are more user-centric. So one of the questions that was asked was, what's new with mashups? And the whole concept of a mashup, I'm sure you guys all know this, is not new at all. What's different now is the people who are writing mashups aren't doing it in Perl script as console apps, right? Instead, they've got some nice new tools like MindTouch's tools and others that allow them to create these composite applications or dynamic reports that are data mashups, et cetera. And what's really fueling that is the increasing number of web service accessible applications and data stores on the internet. This cloud is just growing rapidly. I can tell you that MindTouch out of the box has integration with over 100 different applications and APIs. I mean, that's, you can mash that up and do all kinds of fun, interesting things with. And one of the things that was just mentioned here was the fact that, it's constantly amazing at what people do with things on the web. And once you start enabling people who maybe aren't programmers, maybe they're analysts or, more hackers or something, to create these composite applications, I'm constantly amazed at what people are doing with our software as well. Once you lower the barrier for people to create these kinds of mashups, some really interesting things are being created in this space. It's an exciting time.
Thanks, Aaron. So I'm going to go run from the bottom of the stack to the top again with the following question. What do you think are the key technological achievements that we've made as an industry that have let mashups happen? Right, 10 years ago, when we look at what mashups have become today, the kinds of interactive apps that you can create, the kinds of different media content that you can put together. This is a relatively new thing. What are the key achievements in your mind that led us here?
So I think, from a technology point of view, obviously, things like Ajax, things like web services that made a lot of the data and the services easily available, those are probably the main two achievements to actually enable this whole ecosystem of mashups. What I do think is important to notice, though, that first of all, most people tell you, none of those are new. They've been around for 10 years or, almost 10 years. I think what happens typically with technology is it starts in the enterprise. Web services, SOAP-based web services, were happening probably 10 years ago already with some early adopters. But it takes a long time until those web services or until a new technology goes into the mainstream. In most cases, it means the consumer side and not the enterprise side starts seeing interest, simplifies it. And so that's how we got to REST. That's how we got a lot of the Ajax toolkits and a lot of the toolkits and the easy-to-use infrastructure to build mashups. And then I think what's interesting after that is the enterprise goes back and actually adopts what the consumer world has done. So I always see these cycles in technology, and now we're at the point in the cycle where I think the consumer world has really simplified things. The enterprise is adopting those technologies back into their organizations. And so from an ecosystem perspective and technology perspective, we've simplified things enough so that now people can the masses are really empowered to be productive. And so I think really now is the time where you're going to see a lot of these mashups appear. And you also see vendors that are actually capitalizing on that, whether it's Mindshare with their wiki or it's web services marketplaces, which are exposing hundreds or thousands of data sources, which you can then use to mesh up your applications.
And have you had to adjust the PHP code base or the kind of the surface area of what functionality is available in order to respond for the developer-driven demand for mashups?
So we're constantly responding to how technology changes. We're actually very lucky because we've always been good at text. We've always been good at HTTP, and everything that has happened in the past 10 years has built on top of that. So whether it's XML over HTTP or web services and so on. But yeah, we constantly watch those things, and we invested in SOAP, we invested in RSS and Atom feeds. And so, we just keep on doing those things. And I think now, as we're seeing mashups, we're seeing much more pressure on the server side, I think from a performance and scalability point of view.
So standardization of these protocols, like you said, REST,
Right.
RSS and Atom and SOAP have been some of the keys for you on the back end.
Yeah, exactly. And I think from a presentation point of view, those are the most important things that have been standardized. Now we're looking at is how do we standardize scalability aspects and performance aspects. So, how can web servers scale to 50,000 concurrent connections? Because now everyone has lots of persistent connections open to the server. How can we create push models so you can get real-time updates on the stock ticker change to your client? So that's kind of now we're at the second phase, which is really putting those things into production and making sure they scale.
Cool, thanks. Sean, your thoughts on what the key achievements and I say technological, but we also know that technology is driven by social systems and sociology. So your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that one key part, as Andy mentioned, is the kind of proliferation of services that are available. But I think what's really driven it is actually from the other side, which is web users are out there seeing all these really rich data stores that are available to them in the cloud, be it Google, be it eBay, be it Flickr, be it all these services that expose data to them in ways that they're interested in and they can kind of understand. And so I think it's driven a lot of the interest in the technology in mashups. As we mentioned, like DHTML and JavaScript and all these things have been around for a long time. I think that you had a lot of convergence from the other side of the spectrum, the consumer side, to say, hey, wow, I really want an application that uses the facilities that Google is providing or any other web service and put those into a way that resonates with me and my needs. So I think it's really been driven by that end. And then what we're seeing changing is that there's a kind of a virtuous cycle there of the more mashups happen, the more people are saying, hey, maybe there's a value in me exposing my data store as a web service. And then what you have happening is, with clients like not only Ajax, but Silverlight and Flash as well, you have this kind of interesting model where you have a very standardized middle layer. You've got the data tier on one side, which is the servers providing the information, and then the clients on the other side that are just pulling that information in. And there's a lot of things you can do with mashups there that are interesting, and a lot of challenges when you have different technologies utilizing, because if you're spitting out a JSON string, for example, and you're a Silverlight client, that's not necessarily the right kind of format for you to be coming back with. So those are kind of the challenges and ideas.
So it's interesting to hear you say that you're now starting to see mashups that include rich media like Silverlight and Flash, whereas mashups used to be just bringing up web parts and mixing and matching Ajax. What are the key achievements that allowed that to happen? Because obviously we saw some demos today. We've seen some demos as we've gone on the launch on the road to launching Silverlight, where they've literally they're reusing Flash components and they've got new components written in Silverlight. It's all operating within one browser. It's all being fed by a Java server-side framework. That's non-trivial. I've done plumbing for a long time in technology, and I know it's not easy to get those things to work together.
But the pieces have gotten bigger. The chunks have gotten a lot bigger. So one thing you see very, very consistently now is blogs regularly have YouTube videos embedded in them. And that really is kind of a form of a mashup. You're taking content from YouTube and you're putting it in a blog. It's not as sophisticated just in the appearance as something that takes maybe a mapping application, some other stuff. But it is a form of that. I think it's because the chunks have gotten bigger and more usable. Like we see with every other area of software development, the pieces tend to get bigger and they tend to get more usable by people in standard scenarios, and then you see the proliferation because of the standardization.
So we can stop arguing about whether or not we're going to rewrite the implementation for string?
Oh, I don't know.
Okay, Mike.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on something Andy said, which is, if you look back on the history of web services, and for anyone here who's been in the world of the WS star specs, right, which if you print them out would be a volume of docs this big, and you had WSDL, and you required tooling, and you had to do all this work to basically do Hello World. And then you look at what actually won and worked on the web, which was a way to request asynchronously, XML HTTP request, a design pattern or convention on top of the existing web infrastructure, which is what REST is. It's just a specific way to use the technology that's already there. And iframes, which lets you embed part of a website in yours and with some trickery, send data back and forth through. And so I think that's the key lesson for the things we should be looking for the future to take this forward, which is the simpler, easier, gets the job done quickly, often a minor iteration or tweak over what you've got is often the thing that wins in the long run. And so I think that's, in a lot of the ways, and if you look at some of the things that are on deck for future browsers, things like post message, which I think is in the IE8 beta, I'm not sure, but it's in Firefox 3 for sure, and other browsers as well, is a very simple way to send data between windows, between documents, that's safe and secure because you're sending strings, you're not sending serialized JavaScript objects or any other kind of data. And it's like 3 lines of code. Send a message to another window. On the other window, you register an event listener if you want to get the message. If you don't register an event listener, you don't get the message. It really takes about this much code to understand how to use. And so I think it's those simple, easy to understand, small evolutions of where we are that are the building blocks that people can use with the immense creativity of the entire world banging on the web to build these amazing applications. And so I think that's the way we tend to look at the world and try to figure out what's the little tiny fundamental building block we can distill out of this whole thing. If we just implement that little bit, now everyone's free to go off and run. So I think that's what's exciting to me about what's already happened and what, with, again, small tweaks we can do in the future.
So standards and browser interoperability have been pretty important, right? Being able to have a consistent platform, things like iframes, responding the right way, HTTP, XML request, being able to get those things out there have let you run, have let us get to where we're at today.
Yeah, I think the thing is that I don't have to rewrite my entire web app, right? I'm not translating it into a new language. I'm not building a new set of tools. It's just a minor twist and turn from where I am. And The other key part of that is people are exposing their services, in many cases just over standard URL conventions, right? And that's why a lot of the maps accidentally, the Google Maps mashup happened accidentally because they happen to build a URL scheme for the tiles and the way in which the maps were laid out to make their own client easy to implement. Well, it turns out that I can hit those same URLs too and then build a map into my own application. And then only later did they go, oh, let's build an API on top of this, right? And so I think that it's those really simple, easy, but exposed things. So I can view source the page and look at it. I can see the URL they're going back to, so I can reverse engineer it and do something interesting and add it in. Those are the kind of key attributes that you want to look for. And I think technologies that will succeed for the long run of the next 3 or 4 versions of the web.
Thanks.
I'd like to add to what Mike just said. I know I mentioned this to you previously today, Sam. I'd say SOAP set us back by 2 years.
So talk more about that.
Well, it's just SOAP, REST-based web services solves 90% of the problems, right? We don't need SOAP to do. I mean, transactions and stuff with SOAP, that's wonderful. But
so we're going to see you going out with torches, pitchforks, Don Box, Dave Weiner. We're coming for you.
No. So the key point for me is let's not invent standards that we don't need or to try to sell tools, for example. Instead, let's just adhere to the standards that exist and max them out, like, for example, like with REST.
So how important is standardization to you, and what does it actually mean? People have all along the chain, right? We've got vendor, effectively, of a technology stack, and then we've got you, the end consumer. What's a standard in your mind that lets you that's let you get your business and your technology to this point?
Right. So it's important to understand that MindTouch's software is, and this is a key point, is really a composite of web services, REST-based web services. It's an entirely RESTful platform.
So if it's not SOAP, how is it a web service? Talk about that in terms of REST being
so the standards that are important for us
standard.
is right. So the standards that are important for us is obviously HTTP because everything's over HTTP for us.
Sure.
JSON, we do serialized PHP, we do XML, and Atom, of course, is critically important going forward. And that's what's important to us.
So this is sort of web services with lowercase w, lowercase s, as opposed to the whole WS / dash star stack.
Yeah, we'd like people to get stuff done, and we're not interested in selling them tools. So.
All righty. So let's go back and sort of flip the order. What do you think are the key limitations today that are really holding back the web? What's holding back mashups? What's making it really hard? When you get up in the morning and you worry about where developers are going to be able to build the next great app, where are things falling down from your perspective?
Where are things currently falling down? I mean, right now, it's hard for me to be pessimistic. I mean, you're seeing things are really falling in place currently, it seems to me anyway. The way that we've built out our platform makes it really easy for people to use these existing standards to create mashups. I mean, specifically to mashups, right?
Sure.
Everything's in HTML. You can create your mashup. We store it in HTML, and then that's another endpoint that you can mash up with something else. Gosh, I don't know. Ask the browser guys.
Well, you're surely hearing from. I mean, you have an interesting situation because you certainly hear from developers. Right, because developers are your customers, and you've got developers internally who are trying to implement what you got and sort of automatically make the mashup. Yeah,
I mean, it's still
where are the edges where things are a little bit more bloody?
Well, I mean, we run into vendors who do things that we'd like to make accessible that we kind of have to hack our way around, and that makes it difficult for us. And when we have to hack our way around things that they don't provide clean APIs for.
And so, what are some of those types of things that you got to hack around?
You don't want to know, or you're in mix, man.
No, sure, but this is exactly where we want to go.
There's been difficulties with some of the live stuff that we've integrated. We integrate pretty much everything live puts out there, and we kind of have to hack around some of that stuff. It's not exactly.
So you're doing custom coding to make it REST accessible.
Yeah, just to make it a little bit cleaner, and it requires a little bit more effort than what other vendors put out there. But I don't think that's really necessarily a fundamental problem going forward. One of the things that does make me nervous is I noticed that the panel discussion was what standards do we need, and quite frankly, we don't need new standards, right? We just need to continue to use the ones that are existing, that are emerging, and I think that's going to get us a long way. Yeah.
So, Mike, you called the mashup pattern a hack. And sort of a practice of hacking at one point.
I think I called it a ginormous hack.
A ginormous hack, sorry. Yeah, that's the technical
Well, and that's
term.
what the web is, too. It's a big hack.
Absolutely.
It happens to work. So
where do you think the hack is going to fall down, and where do we need to really focus our attention?
And this is the question, and I said this in my opener, and I really, this is the question I want the audience to answer for me. So people are actually building these mashups. I mean, our job is to build the platform that people want to build great applications, no less, no more. The thing that I think we're paying a lot of attention to lately, if you think about what mashups are, you're trying to combine data from multiple different sources, and you're sometimes doing it on the client. Well, the big challenge here ends up being security, because you're fundamentally trying to share data, right? And you're doing so with the client credentials in certain cases, things like cookies. And so it's fairly easy to accidentally share more data than you really had intended. And I think that is probably the biggest challenge with mashups, and the thing that we're trying to address in certain ways with technology by making things inherently safe or more declarative, so it's more obvious what data you're sharing under what circumstances. I think you've seen in a couple of cases, I know this happened to Microsoft, and I think it's happened to others in some of their gadget implementations, the ways in which you embed one gadget, and there's a container gadget, and the way they send data back and forth, you can mess that up, and it can make you be like, in certain cases, there was a case where I could insert a new gadget and have it pretend like it was the container and then talk to all the rest of the gadgets and get whatever data I wanted out of them, right? Those kind of mistakes are fairly easy to make, frankly, in any system. But when you don't have explicit declarative controls over what data is sent where, again, in very small, I'm not talking about whole, big specs. I'm talking about tiny little pieces here and there that make it easy to say this communication channel can't send code or doesn't send cookies, or I can give declarative lists of, I can make callbacks to servers A, B, and C only, and the originating server tells me where to go. So there's a spec, cross-site XML HTTP request, which has been debated in the standards bodies now, that's attempting to do that. So I think that the key thing is giving people the right tools to do what they want to do, but do so safely as much as possible.
Yeah, security is a really interesting point because it shows up really at every level. Outlook Web Access is an AJAX-based app, and we had to patch that probably 2-3 years ago because we realized that you could put the whole client inside another iframe, and that could inherit the security context, and all of a sudden you've got unfettered access to the person's Exchange server and their credentials, which is a terrible thing. So you put in some limitations now to prevent it from being mashed up because there's not a better security architecture to deal with that yet.
Yeah, I think MindTouch is, we've got it a lot easier because obviously we've got an application that's predominantly used behind the firewall inside the enterprise, and there's an IT administrator presumably who sets up the services that the users can then mash up, right?
Yeah.
So they make some assumptions about the security being provided by each of the services and those vendors, right?
Yeah.
Presumably they're trusted, right?
Yeah, internal mashups are going to be a little easier than the Wild Wild West. We're going to finish this chain, go to Sean and Andy, and then we're going to stop on this question and invite you guys to ask or to make your points. If the people here represent basically the mass of the infrastructure available on the web to build this stuff, if you have key points that you think are missing, where you think mashups are falling down, this is the conversation to have, and these are the guys who can fix it. So, Sean?
So, as mentioned earlier, actually, I work for a company that is trying to sell tools. So, and that's so.
Is that why you sent me between you two?
Yeah, no.
So, you're the firewall, Mike.
It's funny. In a lot of ways, you mentioned that we don't need more standards, and I think the standards proliferation is as bad as no standards at the end of the day when you have them as kind of. We can think of examples of standards that are not completely implemented by all the clients, and how that creates a little bit of chaos in the world. So, on the other hand, REST. I think REST has a lot of good attributes to it. One of the problems with the RESTful APIs, I think, is that they're kind of inherently difficult to tool because I have to know a lot about them to use them. I can't just walk up. I can't, it's very hard for me to catalog all the REST services available in some area and know how to use them in a kind of declarative metadata-based way. So from a tooling perspective, we're saying, let's make it really easy to write mashup applications. And the REST APIs right now, I need to know a lot about what they're doing and what the particular block of JavaScript code that I need. Again, we mentioned JSON, and security is a great point because I think JSON's a very effective way of transmitting state. It's also a little scary to me that you're giving me code across the wire that my client is just going to run. And there's definitely a possible issue there with what that code's going to do if it's not well verified as being simply just state. I think those are two big challenges that mashups face. And as I mentioned earlier, I think one of the other challenges is how do all the new technologies work together in a way that's efficient, in a way that people can understand. There are some sites out there that are helping with some of this. Popfly is an example of a site that's trying to help put another layer on this so that you don't have to know so much about the nuts and bolts. I think a lot of these technologies are great, and the simplicity and the using the existing standards is great for folks that are super technical. What happens is that those things break down as soon as you go up the level to the folks that just want to get a job done. There are a lot of tools out there that make this interesting. Popfly is one of them. I was playing with something called Yahoo Pipes yesterday, which is kind of neat. Anybody who hasn't checked it out, it's kind of a fun thing. They've got a great web-based design surface. So I think there are ways to kind of pull content together in unique ways, but the lack of any sort of a unified way of identifying these mashup providers and being able to aggregate them in a metadata-based way, I think makes it always a one-off.
Yeah, that's a real challenge. There's an open source application called fstop, which is part of the Novell distribution, but you can pull it down freely. It's based on Mono. I was interested in how it worked. I read the code. It uses a lot of Google APIs, and as I walked through, there's all this manual work to actually code around, okay, we're going to build a programming model that's specific to the semantics expressed by the REST interfaces at Google. So one-off development of a library just to talk to this very small subset of Google APIs, from a developer's perspective, requires a lot of time, a lot of attention, a lot of debugging. There's not a feature-rich tooling environment that can pick it up. Now, that said, you've got sort of the greenhouse, right, where everything is growing very properly in sort of a soap-based world, and you've got the rainforest outside where you've got snakes and vines and things coming in different directions. The rainforest is obviously doing really well when we look at the REST-based web services world, but we do have to ask the question, at what point does it end? At what point does the scale break down? MindTouch has support for 100 APIs. How far can that scale? What about when we need 1,000? What about when we need 10,000? Right? How do you actually support that broad base? I think it's an interesting breakdown. Andy?
Yeah, so we've actually dealt with this issue. So we have an open source project called Zen Framework, which is an application framework for PHP. And because we recognize the importance of tooling when you're building mashups or accessing web services, we actually do work with a lot of the concrete data providers and web services providers and have SDKs as part of Zen Framework. So we've worked with Google to expose Google data through our framework, StrikeIron, Nirvanix, and other companies. And so, it really is just putting a bit of lipstick or putting a bit of a wrapper, on a REST service.
Polishing a sneaker. That's the new one I heard. It's much more sophisticated.
But the nice thing is, the developer gets it with IntelliSense, right? He downloads the SDK, he has documentation, he sees the unit test, so he can really, copy and paste from the unit test. And so we've seen that even though it's not a technological challenge, it makes a very big difference for our developers. And so from our point of view, we are going to continue doing that and wrapping these kind of, at least the most popular REST services and SOAP services. So it actually shouldn't even matter to the developer whether this thing is SOAP or REST. He should just get a nice SDK with all the tooling that he really requires. I just want to mention.
Of course, security is going to be super hard in that environment, right? When you're mixing these web services metaphors.
Yeah, well, this is actually, so security isn't really at this stage yet. This is just a stage of how do you actually access the web service, how do you authenticate, how do you get it. But yeah, when you're then combining those web services, then security becomes an issue. So to your previous question, there were just two things I wanted to mention. So two things I would like to see and I think are challenges. The first one is on the client side. Lack of standardization of how different gadgets or different components can actually communicate on the client side. So one of the things, and I do think that there do need to be some standards that emerge in that area. There is a community consortium called OpenAjax, which is now working on creating all sorts of standards around interoperability and security and tooling for rich applications. One of the specs that came out of there is OpenAjax Hub. I think 1.0 doesn't yet really deal with cross-domain gadgets, but they're working towards 1.1 and so on. So what I would like to see is Microsoft with Silverlight, Adobe with Flex, and of course the Ajax community to all support those standards and then make it easy for people who are building mashups to really have those gadgets communicate with each other.
So the specific technology you mentioned was OpenAjax Hub, which is like an integration bus inside the browser for how do you communicate between different components that can speak Ajax.
Right, and there's some toolkits out there like Dojo that already support that standard today. And it's a very, very lean and mean kind of standard. So it's not going to take a lot of effort from the different vendors and toolkits to actually implement that. But it's going to significantly help people who are building mashups and interoperability.
So now I'm going to put the audience on the spot. If you guys have any good questions for our experts or points that you'd like to make, like I was coding this thing and it was just really hard and you guys need to do it better, I invite you to come up to the microphone, line up rather than raising your hand because we are broadcasting. Looking for brave souls. I should have brought awards. I should have brought some. Well,
while you guys think about
t-shirts.
who's going to come up, I'd like to make a couple of statements. I know that OpenAjax there's an implementation by Tibco called PageBus, which we use, which I think the Open AJAX standard was based largely on. At least it looks like that.
Page bus?
Yeah, TIBCO page bus. It's under like a BSD license, and it's really, really lean. And we use that. And then another thing I wanted to mention is you make a good point about, this RESTful architecture. As we start adding more and more APIs and more web services, hundreds, thousands, when does it break down? And I think that's a fantastic question. We don't know yet because the internet was, of course, RESTful, and it hasn't broken down yet.
Well, the breakdown is really not about the ability of the internet itself to be able to support that scale. It's really a question of the capability for more and more developers, more and more what ISVs are becoming, no longer shipping software necessarily to you on a CD, but shipping software via, let's say, a RESTful interface over the web. What's the market for the number of those ISVs that can exist, right? What are the kind of pressures that are going to occur on how do you get recognized, how do you break out of the long tail and build a sustainable business? So I think
no, I did what you're
it's
saying,
really
absolutely.
not a technology issue. It's a question of how much attention can we pay, and what can we do to adapt our coding models when we deal with these kind of problems of scale.
Yeah, and you made a point previous to that also that when you're building, when you're developing software that's inherently RESTful because you're using somebody's REST API like FSpot again?
FStop.
FStop, thank you. Which, by the way, Mono is a wonderful project. We developed the majority of our logic in C#, and we deploy everything on Debian using Mono, which is supported by Novell. So yeah, I think you make a really good point there. It is fundamentally a different paradigm for writing software. It's different from the old object-oriented, right? I mean, I'm sure we all know that, and I'm sure most of you guys know that too.
You mean we're going to stop lying about reuse? Is this the real reuse?
Well, I mean, there's some things that you can do to make the development of software that's RESTful easier. I know that one of the things that our CTO, who's the other founder of MindTouch, has developed is MindTouch Dream, which is a microserver and then also a library for developing RESTful applications that eases the development for what we do.
Okay, I think we have a brave questioner.
So I've got one. Hi, I'm not really a plant. I am from Microsoft. But my question is, so I see all this mashup stuff, and I see a lot of neat consumer applications, and it's really exciting as an end user. So I like runningmap.com, and it's got, I think it's Google Maps. I'm not sure if it's Google or Yahoo's Maps. I'm not even sure who they're using. They even just switched it out without my realizing. So it's neat how they sort of are combining all this stuff. But there's no auth, as best I can tell, right? Like as me as an end user, it seems like there are no ground rules on how the ads work and how the monetization work. So is this stuff, and then there's the inside the firewall versus the outside the firewall thing, like for enterprise scenarios. Is there a business model around this stuff? Are people going to be able to build businesses around mashup? I think that there's a video site, right? I think it was NBC, the Hulu, they were one of the investors in this video site, and then somebody had opened Hulu, it was a mashup of Hulu, but it rewritten all the ads around it and stripped out a lot of the other stuff. It seems like, we're off to the races when that happens and business models get blown up with mashups. Is that going to force things around auth or force things around ads and how ads are displayed? So I'll leave it at that. I'm real curious what the panel thinks of that. Thanks.
So question.
Business models are not my forte, being in a nonprofit open source company. But
yeah, and Vice President of Engineering.
Yeah, that's not what they call me internally. But I will say, though, that I think that it's part of a trend, which is it forces everyone who is building a business model to have something that is of value, right? And I think that's the important thing. The model of walled gardens, you're seeing this in the carrier market. If you go to Japan, there's a couple of companies who have their entire business model based on forcing you through their portal and giving you only the content that they'll serve, right? And they're in big trouble because it turns out people want the entire internet and they want other things. And there are other companies who figured this out and figured out ways to get people what they want and also find business models, whether it be advertising, whether it be upsells or premium services. So I'm not really answering your exact question in terms of I don't know if there is a model for mashups, but I think that it is part of the trend of empowering the consumer to demand what it is they want. And it puts the onus on the businesses to provide that as value and not have some sort of structural monopoly advantage or restricted access that allows them to shove whatever they want to shove to you, even if you don't want it, and charge you for it anyway. So I think that's what makes life hard these days, is you really got to make sure what you're selling, what you're monetizing, what you're advertising is what people want. And when you do that, you can be fantastically successful. But it takes a little bit more work.
Yeah, so you've got ads stuck as a sideboard, but you really want us pre-roll if it's going to be mashed up, right? So how do you deal with that?
I just want to add the more boring side to that answer. which is when you look at enterprise software and you look at how companies are, exposing internal services, and they want, the end game is to have business owners really kind of, have that power builder experience so they can, build very, situational business applications very, very quickly. I mean, enterprise software is a multi-billion-dollar business, and I think, while we're talking a lot of these technologies now, we're talking about them in the kind of consumer context. Those are all enterprise technologies. All those technologies, are very valuable today to enterprises, and they're still at the very early adoption point in the adoption. So I think there are billions of dollars, sitting there for the right companies to capitalize on. I think the challenge that we're going to have is how do we make that dream real? Because right now we're talking a lot about the presentation side, and once you have the data exposed, how can you mesh it up and how can you present that? But the hardest thing is how do you actually understand the data, the semantics around the data, the kind of typical business intelligence problem. How do you get that data into a form so that the business user can truly not understand the semantics in detail, but create very valuable applications?
Thank you. We've got a line of questions, which I'm delighted to see.
Yeah, that's kind of somewhat of my question, which was, what are the challenges and inhibitors of the enterprise adopting mashups, and what are some of the big problems to be solved for everybody?
Well, I guess
Sean hasn't spoken in a bit.
Go for it, please.
We're going to pitch this.
Actually, this is probably the one that I honestly, at least I was actually interested in what these guys said. I think, for enterprises, it becomes the typical things, which is security. Back to the prior question a little bit, as far as either enterprises adopting mashups or exposing their services to mashups, I think the core question that you're asking about, people taking one person's services, stripping off their ads and putting on your own ads is, if you're offering something for value, how do you offer it in a public way? It's publicly accessible, but then still somehow control the way that it's offered. And I think that, the default answer on the web over the last few years has been, we'll just stick ads on everything. I think it just forces people to think a lot more clearly about how their ads interact with their content and what they're really getting people to pay to use. If you go and you watch, a lot of the, I think we mentioned video, YouTube, but like a lot of the stations now or the networks are providing content online. You can go watch a show now and you see 3 commercials through the entire show, but you're forced to watch those commercials. So it's about how do you make stuff really public, but still make sure that you've matched the right revenue model to it. So
one of the reasons I picked on Sean is because tools classically show up when you look at enterprise adoption, right? Because you run out of very motivated hobbyists or sort of ISV-style site builders who are going to spend a lot of time wrapping a RESTful interface. Visual Basic, I think, is probably the best example of something that really took off in the 90s around enterprise developers, really made componentization, drag-and-drop programming, putting together these bespoke applications as Andy described on the fly. Tooling ends up being the solution, and then you need a tools-compliant infrastructure, which is where WSDL and SOAP and the much maligned capital W, capital S web services stack are going to come in. So there's apart from the things that are going to be their own standards, the most popular 50 RESTful web services that everybody just knows how to interact with. Maybe you're using eBay as part of your procurement, or maybe you're using Reardon Commerce, right? People will code to that. But as you start to see this proliferate in enterprises, we're actually seeing a lot more use of service-oriented architectures in enterprises. People are mashing up services that exist using primarily development tools that expect, hey, this WSDL is going to tell me exactly how to use it. The tool is going to show me that in a way that's really easy to program to.
Just throw in some technical challenges on the mashup side. My organization has a responsibility for both providing components to others for purposes of mashing up in probably some simplistic manner as opposed to what's available today. And then secondly, consuming. We certainly want to position ourselves to be able to consume mashup components from other third parties. So the problems that we face generally revolve around security, state management, and page assembly. So to manage things like session state across multiple domains when potentially one panel is active. So those are the types of challenges that we find in our daily basis, and we end up putting hacks in place, with JavaScript timers or maybe server-side proxies to render content across from other domains and different things like that. I was just kind of curious if it sounds like we had a little bit of conversation on security. You know, where do we see these things kind of going over the next 18 months to make that both providing those components in a secure manner and consuming those components in a secure manner and carrying a session state from transaction to transaction?
That's a great question. I'll pitch out the state management question specifically because I think we talked about security. We could certainly go deeper on security, and you're welcome to come up and drill down a little bit further based on the responses. State management across domains. This is a pretty good, interesting challenge.
Well, I can take the first part. You know, I think you talk about proxies and server-side proxies, and I think we shouldn't discount server-side proxies too quickly. There are obviously performance issues, and you want to talk directly to the domains. But especially when you are in a setting that does require security, requires transactions happening on the back end and so on. I think there's going to be a very sizable amount of applications where that server-side proxy is actually something you want to do. You want to keep state there. You want to authenticate, and you want to be able to manage 2 or 3 or 4 transactions and web services in parallel.
So that really ends up being an integration server and kind of bulking up
right.
and being pretty stateful.
So I think that's one option, and then you're also going to have the other one, which is less security, more open, probably more internet-based, and then I don't have the right answers for that challenge.
There are some technologies as well on the client side to help, and I don't know if this is going to help your specific case, but I think one of the big things that's missing on the clients right now is better state storage in general. I mean, the fundamental state model on the web is a cookie, which has, if you've worked on a site of any reasonable size, you've probably already run into the limitation of the size of the cookie. If you're running on a mobile phone, sending cookies up on every request actually is a meaningful part of your bandwidth and transaction time. And so I think that there are already specs out there, and we're implementing one in Firefox 3 around doing deeper client-side storage, both on the session level and also persistently. And again, very simply, it's just looks like big hash tables where you can store data on the client of much higher dimension in terms of size and persistence if need be, and have resources stick to the client. So I think there's a couple of places where giving you just a little bit more power on the client to store that state and resend the transaction or whatever you need to do across them, and have some you wouldn't want to store all of that in a cookie now, but if you could store it locally and make sure it's there across the reboot, things like that, then you can actually start to build some really creative applications. So those are what I'm talking about in terms of fundamental building blocks. It's just a piece you have missing right now, but the good news is it's coming to your desktop, in months.
So it sounds like that's one of the standards or specs that the WHAT-WG is working on.
Yeah, it's DOM storage. It's actually part of HTML5 as well.
Mm-hmm. And we announced IE8 beta support for
that.
that.
So I'm curious to see. It sounds like IE8 is going to be doing some of that as well, which is great news for the web. So we've got a full implementation already in the Firefox 3 betas if you want to try it out. It's really simple, really easy to use, and hopefully IE and others will implement it. And then by the near future, you'll have that as a new capability in your client to match these things up. So,
awesome question. If either of you guys have burning answers, Sean or Aaron, I think the state management shows that we're getting to the right level, I think, of productivity in the discussion and the right technical level that we can all add some value in. So if you guys have some burning answers, or we'll flip to the next question. No? Okay.
Yeah, this is kind of related. I work for ESRI. We're a mapping and geographic information systems software company.
World leader in GIS.
You got it. And I'm on the server software team, and we've spent the last 3 or 4 years developing fairly complex infrastructure for doing GIS software on the server using .NET and Java. And so we've got this huge range of tools. About a year ago, a couple of guys just started playing around with the REST-based version of some services. And then we started doing some JavaScript APIs and Virtual Earth and Google mashups. And so now we're getting ready to release this package as part of our new version. And the way that a lot of people are talking about it is they're saying, look at how easy this is. All you got to know is a little JavaScript. You don't have to do all this back-end programming and all this stuff. You just have to know some simple JavaScript. And it's really neat, and I'm working on the Virtual Earth version of that. But a couple of things that have occurred to me. One is that a lot of our customers, being enterprise-type customers, they've got all these back-end systems, databases and CRM systems and all kinds of stuff that they're needing to integrate into their applications. And so how are they going to do that? Well, at the moment, the only way to do that is to have a .NET application, have a Java application. And so it seems like some of those advantages of having kind of a simple JavaScript application kind of go away. And then the other thing is, even if you got it into the client side, it seems like the technology would start to get really complicated. When you start dealing with JavaScript objects and dealing with JSON objects and trying to parse all that out, it just starts getting fairly complex. And so I really like using the REST-based services and the JavaScript API, but I'm just wondering if we're not just in the early stages of reinventing the wheel of something that's going to look like what we have been doing all the way along.
Yeah, sort of the broad theme is integration versus interoperability, right? When you look at integration, it's always hard. I spent years in enterprise application integration at BEA Systems, and you're always taking whatever you've got, and then you wrap it around the particular endpoint. So when you're not dealing with something that's an interoperable standard, like a web service, you don't have that pluggability model. You don't just have a socket that you can plug into like a light. But that said, I think this is a pretty cool challenge. I'm going to start with Aaron because he deals with this pretty regularly, and I think everybody's going to have a point of view on that.
So, I mean, clearly we're seeing this trend inside the enterprise where a lot of people have invested in SOA architectures and in most cases have failed to realize any return on their significant investment. I think that's why you're seeing companies like MindTouch and other mashup kind of tools that are beginning to proliferate in the enterprise.
I'm going to give you a yellow card for company positioning.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, red card comes next.
Jackbee and Kapow and all these others out there too. I'm still laughing at the yellow card. You're absolutely right that if all of the page compositions being done in JavaScript, then it does get kind of complex, and then it's all being processed client side, and that's really not the best approach in every case.
So do you see an escape from the integration nightmare of having to have adapters to all the enterprise systems, apart from saying, hey, everyone, upgrade your SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, systems to all the ones that support web services? How do you get out of this?
I think everybody's going that direction already. I mean, increasingly, that's what I'm seeing. When I talk to customers and users of our software, we have far more users of our software than we do paying customers, mind you, because we're open source. But I mean, we're already seeing where they have this web service enabled applications. Most of the applications that are coming out that they're using are web service enabled. As far as the JavaScript side, I mean, there's other ways to do it where you can have a page composition engine that's not entirely in JavaScript, right? So.
But is the problem, so just to understand, is the problem that you're seeing is that folks are exposing stuff as a service-oriented architecture, and then they don't have the means to tie it together in a way that actually they get their investment back? Is that
yeah, we're seeing that a lot. Absolutely, we're seeing that a lot.
It seems to me, the issue that we've faced and seen is just that, as you kind of pointed out, that JavaScript for complex applications breaks down very quickly for a number of the reasons. And that I think, again, it's important for us to separate the issues here. One is being able to expose the services, the other is being able to consume them. And if we assume that the consumption side is a JavaScript-based client, now we've got a bunch of them. We've got Safari and Firefox and Internet Explorer, which is, that's one of the reasons that we've been successful in this space. Unfortunately, that technology just breaks down. When you look at technologies that are more stable and more developable, maybe I'll take a dive here for a yellow card, like Silverlight, for example.
Don't make me. It's coming out.
It allows you to build an application that more closely models the typical application development lifecycle you've had, whether it be Silverlight or Flash or these other kind of more traditional models. I would think that organizations are going to be more successful with those technologies than they were trying to cobble together JavaScript.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, you saw like this whole Web 2.0 boom where people are making, quite frankly, in a lot of cases, really crappy applications that are implemented entirely in JavaScript. Let's replace Microsoft Word in JavaScript. It's just ridiculous. You need to have a more robust platform.
Why is it ridiculous?
Yeah,
okay.
I don't buy into it. I mean, the reason why I think it's ridiculous is because putting all of your processing client side doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
I agree.
Distributing the processing, the behavior across server and client, and ideally multiple servers, right?
Right.
And the client, then that makes sense. But you're not seeing that.
So Mike's office.
Now, you guys are going in that direction. You guys are going in that direction for sure.
No. Mike's office is across the street from Google. He has good friends over there. So don't insult his apps.
What you just defined is what I believe is what, in terms of distributing the processing between the client and the server, is exactly where the web is going right now, and that's the right direction. I mean, if you look at, we can give you an umpteen number of Office, spreadsheet, presentation, email, name the application. It's on the web. And we've seen this pattern before. I encourage you to go back and, listen to the words of, executives from Wang and DEC in the 70s and 80s talking about the desktop will never replace the mini computer. And we saw what happened there. I think that the web is the trends are kind of unstoppable in a couple of ways. And all of these actions, you have client-side scripting through JavaScript, and you have server processing, through PHP, through .NET, through whatever it may be. And it's, the wheel of reincarnation over and over. So we started with, the dumb terminal and the smart server, and then we went to only smart clients in terms of DOS, and then you went to smart client, smart server, and client-server computing. First version of the web was dumb client, smart server, where you just give me some layout and I render it and all the work happens on the server. And get looky, we're back to smart client, smart server, right?
Yeah, the waves
and
keep evolving.
given the computing power in my cell phone in my pocket, which eclipses a computer from 4 years ago, I think it's, doing it only on the server or only on the client doesn't make any sense, right? And so, and I think you're seeing that the takeoff on a lot of these applications, and people really pushing the bounds. And hopefully some of the announcements today, and you've seen, in future versions of Firefox, you're seeing multiple 3x, 4x, 5x, 6x improvements in performance in JavaScript and new features and things that really take the platform to where it needs to be. Is it difficult to do? Yeah. Can it be easier? Absolutely. But I think that there's no reason fundamentally why the web can't build many of the applications that we're interested in doing, and that you have to throw the whole thing away and reach for a new tool because one specific challenge you've had.
I'm going to cut this
First
off
of all, I
because
have to agree.
we got
I have
people
to
waiting.
agree.
We got people waiting
Okay.
for questions. 3 deep.
All right, we're
so
done.
please, thank you for the discussion. Thank you for the question. Move on.
Somewhere in here's a question, I hope.
We'll interpret it for you.
Thanks. So I recently Googled the phrase mashups for the masses and found out that it was used by people to describe tools like Popfly and Pipes and Mashup Maker and all these are tools for the average user, which is most of the people who use the web, or non-technical. I was wondering if you guys could sort of comment on the gap between the complexity of the technologies that makes all this stuff happen and the simplicity of all these tools that make it available to the average user so that this stuff will really catch on. Because it seems to me that there's still got to be some basic core understanding that you need to know about, even if, no matter how simple the tools are. And there's some gap in there that I'd be curious to see what you have to say about it.
So Sean and Andy are both in the tools business. So.
Yeah, but I think the mashup for the masses is really your portal page on live.com or Yahoo or Google, where you are taking RSS feeds, that you want to get information from, news sites and stuff like that, and putting them together. More so than I created an application to map where all the garage sales are in my neighborhood. I think that it's more about data mashups than it is about kind of having to do coding together.
Like JotSpot, right? Would be an example of sort of more of a walled garden approach, but certainly being able to have end user mashups where you don't have to be deep semantically and how these things connect.
So I think that's the end user mashup scenario. Is kind of the at one end is the pipes, like we mentioned, the Yahoo pipes. At the other end is just simply I type in feeds and I get kind of a web portal, web parts model. At the other end is like things like Popfly you mentioned and those other tools. The thing is with Popfly is that somebody has to sit down and single out, I want to write a provider for Flickr and I want to write a provider for Google Maps. And that still takes, it doesn't scale very well to like all of the services available in the world.
But there should be a tool to make it easy to build the Cirque du Soleil app. Did everybody see the Cirque du Soleil demo? So that was a great business app. I wish I had apps that I could use that ran my business like that. But when you look at the actual components, it's just your email, it's your calendar, it's a connector to one to one type of ERP system. So
there's a lot of disparate data in the world. At some point, it's going to take smart people with specific skills to put it together, and I think that's.
Yes, I think there are two audiences which are really interesting, which are the non-developer audiences, because the developers get it, they can write code, and they'll do their mashups. And the first one are just the consumers, right? The consumers, how are they going to use mashups? I think probably in the simplistic form, right, where they have their, their Gmail email, their eBay shopping cart, or their Amazon shopping cart, and they can kind of create a dashboard of what they're doing. I don't know if they're going to get so much more sophisticated in the coming years. I think the user that is really interesting, though, is kind of the Excel user, right? So it's not a developer, but it is a semi-technical person that has used Excel, knows how to do graphs, knows how to do pivot tables, maybe. If you took a pivot table course, and I think that is a user that whoever is going to get it right for that user, has a huge applicable market, because Excel today is probably the most popular database out there. A lot of small, medium shops are running basically on Excel. They don't have Salesforce or CRM. And I think there are a lot of companies that are looking at those kind of users. I haven't yet seen someone who's managed to get that ease of use, right, so that they could get, that same kind of experience for that Excel user base.
Thanks. So we've got about 10 more minutes for questions, so go ahead.
Hey guys, Will Kapke from MySpace, and coming from MySpace and talking about mashups, I have to bring up Open Social. From talking about security and talking about RESTful APIs and things like that, I just want to get your guys' opinion on what you think of Open Social and its future and how it's being done. Hopefully you guys know a little bit about what's happening with it. Yeah.
It's total shit. No, I'm just joking.
There's a camera.
Aaron, your red card is right here, buddy.
I think it's great,
There's the YouTube clip, just the first part.
I think it's great. At some point, MindTouch will have a container for Open Social. I think it's good stuff. But, we'll see how it develops. It's pretty young yet, so.
For those of us like myself who are totally ignorant of anything other than what those two words might mean when put next to each other, can you give us a little background on what Open Social is?
Yeah, so it's just a container for Google gadgets to communicate to one another. Somebody more technical who's looked into it can offer some more insight. I haven't looked into it a whole lot.
So kind of like an Open Ajax hub, but for Google appecations.
Sure. Anybody else want to give some more technical briefing?
Oh, we've got somebody.
Don't give Mark the microphone though.
we're gonna go for the audience response.
Well, there's this thing called the social graph. Pardon my cold. And the point of Open Social and Facebook apps is that you have access to your friends, right? And you have access to the standard dashboard interface of the environment. In fact, what my question was going to be about is moving beyond mashups. Mashups are, as my colleague from Facebook said, 2 years ago. So we love the fact that Microsoft is caught up with mashups, but Facebook apps, and credit
That's 20
to Dave,
years ago.
Well, credit to Dave. He's over there. He'll be on our panel tomorrow. There's this thing called Facebook. You gave them some money, so you must know about them.
Yeah, we use Facebook.
And so
a lot.
Facebook revolutionized a pluggable architecture that exposed the social graph and invites and a dashboard interface to create a very rich environment for developers to develop in. And that is a metaphor moving beyond just mashups. Open Social picked that up and said, well, why should we lock ourselves in Mark Zuckerberg's, vices? Though, of course, Bill Gates invented that notion.
I think he wants to be on the panel, but
the point is that Open Social is interchangeable between platforms, and we applaud our friends from MySpace to be open and to expose their social graph. And so just like REST has opened up APIs and we've got this wonderful environment now, we're pushing the envelope of what Ray very eloquently talked about as a distributed, meshed world, right?
Okay. Thank you.
So when you're developing applications, a lot of times you have opportunities for web services, and you have to make a choice between making a RESTful application or using SOAP. We often use SOAP internally at our company, mostly because it provides this common standard that you don't have to learn the API for. People are usually surprised at how easy it is to pull up a PHP app and write 3 lines of code. You have a proxy over to this web service that exposes all the methods that are on there, and a couple more lines you're calling that, and then getting back complex data types are being returned back to you, and it's really simple to hit. But then when you look at other web services, let's say like Amazon's S3, that's a RESTful application. It's the storage, the online storage service. And if you think about what it would, how bad it would be if it was SOAP, that would be a bad choice to use SOAP in that particular application, because SOAP isn't going to support binary data when you're sending. It's basically the protocol for sending and receiving files. So
that's not correct, because MTOM and the DIME attachments entirely let you transport a binary payload within a SOAP message.
Is it like a base64 encode, or is it you can literally embed binary data inside of your XML tags?
You can attach documents to SOAP requests. The only problem is that there's a real interop issue. And the Microsoft, I think,
in terms of the encoding issues,
some are using MIME, some are using DIME, and I've actually seen a lot of customers dump soap exactly for those reasons and just, use UU encode or something like that. And,
Yeah, well, it's a little bit like UDDI, right? You needed somewhere to look up web services. The first version wasn't very good. Eventually, it'll get solved correctly, but SOAP will eventually solve that.
Yeah, so my question is, what other considerations should you be thinking about when you're trying to make a decision between REST and SOAP?
Versioning is one. SOAP does tie you fairly strictly to the object model that you're talking to, whereas the abstraction that you get through, a straight XML or JSON kind of level is a little more. It's abstracted from the code that you're writing, so you don't introduce dependencies down the chain, which you can with SOAP because it's so closely tied to the objects. So I think SOAP. My issue with SOAP is simply. In the case where you're kind of both ends of the pipe understand each other and know what services they're offering, it works well. I think that there's a complexity bar there that's kind of difficult. You need to have a SOAP deserializer handy, and you need to be able to make sure that you have access to all the types that it's referencing or be able to create them. And so I think that it's really about how important that it is that you have complex data on both sides of the transaction and that data is of the same type, whether or not you want the client side to be able to kind of munge the data as it wishes and then walk away with it.
And you want to think about the developer audience that you're engaging too. If you're talking about that more very practical coder, right? What are they going to be able to handle? I think at the end of the day, everybody needs a library or some kind of wrapper. Nobody wants to program in native XML. Nobody does. You need to use a language you're comfortable in. The question is, are you going to go and copy and paste the wrapper from phpfreaks.net, or are you going to click a button in your IDE and have it automatically generate those wrappers, right? You got to figure out which class of developer you're dealing with, because they're really different developer audiences.
By the way, I would argue that for the internet, I would only go with REST, because I think if you want to get a broad developer base, using your service, you're going to be most successful. A lot of REST services, you don't even need a parsed DOM. You can just use a regular expression and get whatever data you need, out of that request. I think behind the firewall, then it goes back to, it depends what you're doing. There's certain systems that might be very complex. In the services business, there are actually standard WSDL files that you have to use. But again, behind the firewalls, maybe the tools that help you expose SOAP services and discover SOAP services, might benefit you. So.
Thanks. So we have about a minute and a half.
Okay, quick question to Firefox guy. Are you going to support what they call web slices and activities?
I don't know. We've got to look at the specs.
Okay. And then to the Microsoft guy.
There's two of us.
Okay. Rumor has it if you don't spend your $40 billion on Yahoo, you'll have some extra cash. What are you going to do to help people in this room do mashups? I mean, you don't have to always give money to people like Facebook and big companies. You can take $1 billion and slice it into lots of little pieces, and you can generate a lot of mashups.
So the most important thing that we do, and I think this is true of the PHP and the Mozilla team as well, the most important thing we do is we work on creating technology that makes it really easy to build what you want to build, right? You heard the expression democratizing software. I think everybody here on the panel has had a hand in democratizing software. So you go back to the model of, do you want to hand out fish or do you want to teach fishing? If we can hand out better and better automated rods that cost you nearly nothing, you're going to be able to end up with a lot more fish. So thank you for your question.
As somebody who's not Microsoft, I'd like to just say that, I know that our team, although almost all of us are ex-Microsoft, really benefit from the tools that Microsoft puts out. It does make development significantly easier. I mean, all of us are running typically 2 or 3 operating systems on our machines, and the reason why we're running Windows is because of the development tools.
Well, part of it is the kind of conversations that have opened up in the community recently. When I look at Expression Web, so I'll hold up a yellow card for myself, it's supporting PHP, it's supporting Firefox, right? 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, that would have been unimaginable. But when we can actually create these kind of forums, when we create good technical relationships between every major technology vendor, whether or not it's a competing technology or a collaborative stack technology, that's the best place for us to spend our money. And when I think about the budget I have in my lab, I'm always going to pay for better developer tools. I'm going to pay for PlugFest and better ways to connect between PHP, Firefox, Microsoft technologies, non-Microsoft technologies. That's where my focus is.
So specific things for this gentleman's question, though, specific things. There's some refactoring, a lot of work going on over in the live organization to create more services that you can aggregate. When we did the Ajax Control Toolkit and the ASP.NET Ajax platform itself, my group and some other folks pushed really hard to make sure that we were supported not only on the big three, Safari, Internet Explorer, Firefox, but also Opera, and make it so that we do support those platforms across the board. We made sure that ASP.NET Ajax, we went through and made sure we weren't colliding any of the aliases we were using, because our original version was. So you can use Dojo and ASP.NET Ajax together. So I think there's lots of little things we're doing in the tools department to try and make it a lot easier for developers to put technology together in the web space and be successful. So, I don't know if we need the Yahoo acquisition dollars to make that happen, but I think there's lots of things we're trying to do to really make it successful for folks across the board, in addition to some of the work we're doing with the PHP folks.
Not to be a Microsoft apologist here, but the other thing I can say about Microsoft that they've been doing increasingly well is connecting with startups. I know I saw somebody from Medium walk in a second ago, and there he is. They're getting some love from Microsoft. I mean, MindTouch gets some love from Microsoft. There's lots of startups. A lot of them seem to be Brad Feld projects, though, for some strange reason. So we're getting some love from them.
So this is the lightning round, and this is the bonus for those of you who stuck around this long. So from each of our 4 distinguished panelists, I asked them to finish the conversation with what would the next great open source project or the next great startup build that would fundamentally solve one of the key challenges in building mashups? Because when you build the right infrastructure, opportunity shows up. So I'm going to start with Andy and end with Aaron.
So I mentioned it before. I think one of the issues is how do you actually get to the data that you want to mesh up? And so I think IBM talked about like mashup hubs, where on the server side they have kind of a, I would say, middle tier that enables you to kind of bring in your feeds, bring in your web services, and somewhat model those services to then create a representation that you can then easily mesh up as the business user. So I think that is a realm where I don't see a lot of activity in, and I think it's going to be very interesting to start seeing some companies that emerge around, creating the right models, because those models are really it's the hard work, and those are the models that are going to enable people to build really good business applications.
Thanks.
I think figuring out a way to do for mashups what RSS did for syndication. Creating a simple way for providers of mashups to provide a discoverable common way for folks to walk up to them and discover their services and use them and integrate in their applications.
So like a WSDL for REST?
Well, I better.
I knew that could cause Aaron some heartburn.
I think one of the things that you're seeing in a lot of companies, whether it be Facebook, MySpace, Google or others, that stumble upon the challenge with the web is it's getting bigger, not smaller. And so trying to navigate your way through it and understand what's the content, what's the applications that are interesting to me is a very difficult problem. So I think less on the infrastructure side, more on the application side, people who can make it easy to personalize the web for the things that are interesting to me, my friends, my family, the colleagues. Any variant of an application all around there I think has a tremendous amount of value for people because it shows them what they want, which is the content, the application, the people they want to communicate with.
Yeah, I agree. I think that what I find very interesting is making it so that all of these web services, not only can you mash them up, but you can do so in a highly concurrent fashion rather than doing it serially like what I see so often. So providing kind of this platform for orchestrating all these services and then composing them in a way that can be done high performing is something that's very interesting. So
it's interesting because there's a lot of connections and a lot of state to manage from the state issues that we talked about before. So there's probably some computer science required to solve that.
Yeah, so to answer the question, what's the next emerging open source? We're doing it, baby, at MindTouch.
Well, I want to thank the panelists for participating.